In what ways are COVID-19 and HIV similar? That was part one, and this is part two in a series called Similarities Between HIV and COVID-19 Emerging in Scientific Literature. This is a 5-part series in collaboration with Christina Virgil. Unfortunately, I'm going to be talking for most of this video, but she's going to take over for the next one. The first video established that there are peer-reviewed scientific journals and credible institutions that are looking at this question and noting similarities between these two diseases. In this video, we're going to start breaking down what mechanisms are similar between these diseases, and in this video, we're going to cover CD4 T cells specifically. Now, before we dive into T cells specifically, let's talk about the overall immune system real quick. As mentioned in the last video, our immune system has two parts to it, our innate response and our adaptive response. The innate immune response is also called the non-specific response because this part of the immune system is generalized. It's going to behave pretty much the same way regardless of what threat you're facing. Some of the cells below in our innate immune system would be dendritic cells, macrophages, monocytes. We're not going to focus on these as much because most of the overlap between COVID and HIV appears to be in the adaptive immune system, although side note, it looks like COVID can mess up the innate immune system as well. The adaptive immune response tries to improve our immune system's response to specific threats that we're facing. The two main parts of the adaptive immune response are B cells and T cells. B cells are where our antibodies, that's that part of the immune system, but let's look at the T cells. We have two main types of T cells. One is called the CD4 helper T cell. This cell kind of coordinates the immune response and pulls in other parts of the immune system to help fight a specific threat. And we also have CD8 cytotoxic T cells, also known as killer T cells. These are the T cells that are hyper-focused on destroying specific threats to our body. Now, the top half of this chart, which has MHC bringing antigen of the threat to T cells to show them this is the kind of threat we're trying to fight. We're going to touch on that in the next video, but just keep that in your memory. So let's focus on CD4 T cells, helper T cells that coordinate immune response. To review, HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus, and the way that this virus creates an immunodeficiency is specifically by infecting CD4 T cells. That is what HIV does. That's its primary goal. It gets in CD4 T cells and destroys them, dysregulates them, depletes them. Side note, when you get HIV, it presents as flu-like symptoms within 2 to 4 weeks of infection. What else presents with flu-like symptoms often? COVID-19. Point being, the way something feels during the acute phase doesn't tell you what's actually happening in your body. So HIV infects CD4 T cells. SARS-CoV-2, aka COVID-19, typically infects cells through the ACE2 receptor. Now, the problem with this is that ACE2 receptors are all over our body. Most scientific articles will call them ubiquitous. They're just all over the body, and that's what makes COVID so horrible, is it can infect cells all over our body. But here's the problem. Researchers are finding that COVID also infects CD4 helper T cells. Let's look at 2 studies that found this, starting with this one from 2023. The study says that impaired innate and adaptive immunity is a hallmark of COVID-19, particularly in patients that progress to the critical stages of the disease. Note, it doesn't say only in severe critical cases. This could happen in mild or moderate cases as well. In severe COVID-19 cases, alterations in immune response was at least partially triggered by infection of CD4 T cells, helper T cells, by COVID, and consequent dysregulation of immune function. It goes on to say that when COVID infects a CD4 T cell, if sustained, this can culminate in cell dysfunction and potentially cell death of the CD4 T cells. This is another study from 2022 in this case that also found that COVID can infect CD4 T cells. The studies showed that COVID infected mainly CD4 T cells without using the ACE2 receptor that it usually uses to infect cells. It says that COVID infection triggered pronounced T cell death, which potentially contributed to lymphopenia in patients with COVID. Lymphopenia means a drastically reduced T cell count. It goes on to say that not only did T cells lose their ability to control viral infection, but it also potentially carried the virus to other parts of the body as the T cells moved through our blood. It also points out that this CD4 T cell infection happens without ACE2 receptors present. So if we design treatments for COVID that address ACE2 receptors, the primary point of infection for COVID, it may not help with this T cell issue. To reemphasize, they say our results provided evidence to show that SARS-CoV-2 infected T cells. And also, other recent studies have found infection of neutrophils, macrophages, monocytes, B cells, T cells. These are all other parts of the immune system as well. that was some of the other innate immune system issues I was talking about, but again, not the focus of this video. The paper concludes that these events may lead to T-cell dysfunction, depletion, and eventually lymphopenia in patients. Again, that's very low T-cell counts. In addition, these dying helper T-cells could trigger excessive inflammation that leads to severe immunopathogenesis. That means progression of disease in the immune system in patients. Remember from the last video that chronic inflammation is another hallmark of HIV and looks like something that these CD4 T cells contribute to in COVID. So there is strong evidence that both HIV and COVID-19 infect CD4 helper T cells. And if that wasn't bad enough, both of them also affect MHC in this chart and CD8 killer T cells. Part 3 will focus on similarities in COVID and HIV's ability to evade our immune system and cause T cell exhaustion. And the next part is going to be delivered by Christina Virgil.